Well, embattled power utility Eskom is barely keeping the lights on. Last night, Eskom implemented stage 6 load shedding for the first time. The power utility began stage 6 rotational power cuts as it continues to battle capacity constraints. Now, for more on this, I'm joined in studio by Lelo Mdhladhla, energy expert from Powerx. A very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Lelo, as I said in the intro, I mean, yesterday for the first time, South Africans experienced stage 6 load shedding. It was towards the evening. And then you have a Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, earlier this year saying, we don't have an energy crisis. We've got an energy problem. And if we don't deal with that, it will become a crisis. But for the first time, we're experiencing stage 6 load shedding. What kind of picture does this actually paint? Is this not telling of this crisis?
Quite right. It is a crisis. I think what made this particular issue more of a crisis than previous load shedding instances is that there were 3 sets of coal-fired power stations that experienced flooding yesterday: Camden, Duva and Tutuga. And those contribute about 8,000 megawatts to the grid. So in addition to that, you also had supply issues to the Medupi power station. So you had a culmination of a perfect storm, so to speak, excuse the pun, that has created this issue of stage 6 load shedding. However, they indicated that as of this morning, we have reverted back to stage 4, and then we'll see what happens in the coming weeks and days as this issue progresses.
Sure. So even if, let's say, for example, the rain stops, because that was one of the issues that was brought up, the issue of wet coal with the persistent rain. If the rain stops, by Thursday, we'll still be experiencing load shedding because that's not actually the core reason.
Exactly. The truth of the matter is that even if the rain does stop, the stockpiles of coal supplies that they have that will be fed into the coal-fired power stations will still be wet. So that's why I think we'll be seeing load shedding for the foreseeable future, at least for the next few weeks. The stages may differ in terms of how much capacity they need to take off the grid, but I do believe that load shedding is going to be with us for the festive season, at least until the new year.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things you touched on now is the issue of the coal supply. We saw last week there were issues of coal not reaching where they should be. Maybe take us into that. What exactly is the issue there?
Well, the issue is twofold. I mean, the truth of the matter is that the transportation of coal from the point of being mined to the actual power station is quite a long process. And the main issue is that the conveyor incline that is required to take the coal from where it should be to the coal-fired power station is quite a long conveyor belt. And that conveyor belt, if it's rainy, if it's wet, and there's all sorts of weather-related issues, it can impact the ability, number one, of the coal to be at the right temperature, to be able to be burnt and produce electricity, number one. Number two, also the actual machinery itself can be impacted. So it's almost like a combination of a lot of supply issues that are resulting in the load shedding that we have.
And can they not be dealt with? Why are they not being dealt with? I read somewhere, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the issues that we have with our coal is that when it's wet, it becomes like baby powder. And so it cannot do what it's supposed to do. Why are, the experts who are working there not dealing with those issues? So we don't frequently and repeatedly have to experience this?
Well, I think it's a case of poor planning. I mean, the truth of the matter is that during this period of the year, we do experience hot temperatures in South Africa traditionally. So I don't think there has been planning taking into consideration the climate change that we're experiencing now with the flooding. And to your point correctly, if you understand that the coal needs to be kept at a dry temperature in order to provide the feedstock into the coal-fired power stations, why has there been no solution made to house it so that when it's being transported, there's no impact in terms of the weather? So you're quite right. The experts have not done what they should have done in terms of making sure that we have security of supply.
And I mean, that begs the
that this has been a long time coming. In terms of the maintenance of the existing coal fleet, there has not been maintenance done for a number of years, and even the Minister of Public Enterprises admitted that they're about 2 to 3 years behind on maintenance. And you've also got an aging fleet of coal-fired power stations that are going to be decommissioned in the next 10 years. And that talks to the independent resource plan. So you've got a situation whereby you have these aging coal-fired power stations that have to keep running, but they're not being maintained. And yet they're going to be decommissioned in 10 years. So you've got this balancing act that government has to play consistently while keeping the lights on.
Yeah. And while they then trying to deal with, keeping the lights on, there's calls that are being made for, President Cyril Ramaphosa to come back from his trip in Egypt to come and deal with the energy crisis. And I asked you this off air, what is the president?
Well, the president can't do much more than what's already being done. He has his minister, he has his Eskom executive, they have a board, they have a team, they have people who are employed to do their jobs, and that's what they need to do. The president being here does not change the current situation. For me, it's political grandstanding to request him to come back.
Sure. Before we wrap up the conversation, I mean, a few months ago, you were here speaking about the integrated resource plan. And I want to ask you, with the energy crisis that we're currently seeing and the struggles to keep the lights on, how does that assist us? How does it help us?
What it does help us in terms of the direction is that there is provision in the resource plan for diversification from coal. In the resource plan, it says that there will be about 12,500 megawatts of coal decommissioned by 2030. That will be replaced by renewables, so that's solar and wind, as well as gas and diesel. So what it makes provision for is almost like a move away from coal, which is the crux of this current crisis, and a recognition that we need to have a more diversified energy mix so we don't have the same situation that we have now. So I think beyond 2030, we'll see a completely different landscape in the energy space as we know it.
Sure. And how long would that take?
Well, I mean, the IRP makes provision for a 10-year runway in terms of the implementation of these other alternative energy sources, but it's probably going to take a bit longer for us to be completely diversified from coal, because the truth of the matter is we do have billions of reserves in coal. We just have to go about producing it and using it in a better way to ensure that we have security of energy in the country.
And in the interim, while we wait for those plans to, get underway, what can we as South Africans do? I mean, those who have the finances are able to get themselves, other resources to ensure that they are able to keep their lights on in their homes and in their businesses. Yeah. But what can we really do as South Africans?
Well, we can do exactly what you've just mentioned. I mean, I actually answered this question earlier on in another interview earlier this morning. And what I was saying is that as consumers, we need to look at alternative means of supply. What do I mean by that? We need to invest in generators. So if you can't afford a generator as an individual, maybe look at your community and see if you can put together money to buy one as a collective. We also need to look at installing solar panels on our roofs. So I think we have to be quite clever about understanding that this is going to be the new normal for the foreseeable future. This is going to be how things are going to be for the next few months to a year or even longer. So we actually just have to be innovative and invest in those alternative means of energy supply.
And that's the sad truth. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Lelo Mdhladhla, energy expert from Powerx, speaking to us about the latest round of load shedding that we're experiencing here in Gauteng.